All right, today we're tackling a topic that is absolutely essential for anyone involved in the New York property market, figuring out what duties require a real estate license versus which activities are totally exempt. Whether you're an investor, a property manager, or maybe you're just helping a friend find an apartment, you are definitely going to want to pay attention, because knowing where that legal line is drawn can make all the difference. So, let's jump right in.
So let's just start with why this matters so much. And honestly, it comes down to this number, $1,000. That is the potential fine for a single act of unlicensed real estate activity here in New York. I mean, can you imagine $1,000 just for helping a buddy find an apartment and collecting a small fee? And believe me, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It can get way worse. We're talking misdemeanors, civil fines up to 4 times whatever commission you earned, and yeah, even jail time. This is exactly why getting these rules right is so critical.
So, who's making these rules anyway? Well, the main player here is the New York State Department of State. You'll hear people call it the DOS. And the rule book they use, that's Article 12A of the Real Property Law. This is the bedrock, the foundational legal text that spells out exactly what a real estate pro can and cannot do in the state. You know, this whole system isn't just about creating red tape. It's really built on these 4 key ideas. It's all about protecting you, the consumer, from fraud or just plain incompetence. It makes sure agents and brokers actually know what they're doing through education and exams. And it holds everyone to a high ethical standard. Ultimately, it's about making sure the marketplace for one of the biggest investments of your life is professional and trustworthy. Okay, this right here, this is the core of everything. Section 440, it defines what a real estate broker is. But I want you to focus on 2 little phrases, for another and for a fee. Seriously, if you remember anything from this, remember those 2. They're the magic key that unlocks this entire licensing puzzle. So once you're in the licensed world, there are basically 3 levels you can be at. Most people start out as a salesperson. You do the 77-hour course, you pass the state exam, and this is key. You have to be sponsored by a broker. Now, a broker, they're the ones with more experience and a lot more education, 152 hours worth, and they can work on their own. And then you have this interesting middle ground, the associate broker. They've met all the requirements to be a broker, but they choose to work under someone else. It's a really clear ladder of expertise and responsibility. All right, now that we've got the basics down, let's get into the real meat of it. We're gonna start with the specific activities that, according to the law, absolutely require you to have a New York real estate license. This is where the rubber really meets the road. Look, if you feel like your head is spinning with all these rules, this slide boils it all down to one simple test. Just ask yourself 2 questions. Am I doing this for someone else? And am I getting paid for it? If the answer to both of those questions is yes, you almost certainly need a license. If you're just dealing with your own property or you're not getting any compensation, you're usually in the clear. So what does that look like in the real world? Let's talk specifics. We're talking about core real estate activities, like listing someone's house on the MLS, representing a buyer and negotiating on their behalf, or managing rent collection for several different landlords. Each one of these involves acting for someone else for some kind of fee. If you're doing any of these, you have to have a license. It's that simple. Okay, so we know what requires a license. But just as important is knowing when you don't need one. So let's flip the coin and look at the exemptions. This is where you can operate with confidence, legally, without having to go through the whole licensing process. So here are the big ones, the most common exemptions you'll see. First and foremost, property owners. This is huge. If you own your own building and you want to rent out a unit yourself, you do not need a license for that. It's your property. Attorneys are also exempt, but only when it's part of their actual legal work. And pay close attention to this last one, building employees. The key condition is that they have to work for a single owner or manager, and showing apartments has to be incidental to their main job, not their primary function. And that last point about employees brings us perfectly to the industry's biggest gray area, property management. Oh man, this is where so many people get tripped up. It's a field where some things you do require a license and other things don't, and it can be a really confusing and costly mistake to make. Okay, this chart is your best friend for figuring out property management. If your duties include what the law sees as brokerage, like collecting rent for a bunch of different unrelated owners or negotiating leases for them, yep, that's brokerage. You need a license. But what about just fixing a leaky faucet or handling maintenance requests? Nope. That's not a real estate service, so no license needed there. And like we just said, if you're just managing for a single owner, you often fall under that employee exemption. Phew, okay, we've gone through a lot.
So let's take a second and boil this all down to the absolute key takeaways from our explainer. Because at the end of the day, knowing this stuff is your best protection against accidentally breaking the law and getting hit with those massive penalties we saw at the start.
All right, here it is, your compliance checklist. The number one rule, acting for others for a fee means you need a license, period. Remember, the penalties are no joke. Owners get a pass, but only for their own property. And when it comes to property management, it's all about what you're actually doing. But really, the most important advice I can give you is this. When in doubt, don't guess. Ask. Talk to the Department of State or a good real estate attorney. It's the smartest move you can make. So after all that, we land on a final question. And this one's for you. Think about your own situation, your next move in the market. Are you acting for someone else? Are you getting paid for it? Now that you know the rules of the game, you can make sure your next move lands you firmly on the right side of the law.